cues, like, oh my gosh. But I don't really, in my work, it just stands up as it is. I kind of really move past it. I kind of don't get involved in it. It's just down to the people who might want to engage with the film and what it takes from them. I'm just glad that I was there to document that moment so that people here now can see what we were about in that moment.
Professor Gus John, I'm a hail up to you, sir, as always. One of our elders that I'm always proud to call an elder. For the work that you do and continue to lead. But I'm going to take us back to 1981. I know you've always been interested and been an advocate of politics and conscious politics. But I want to take you back to 81 when this tragedy happened. And what you did, what you felt your role was immediately after. What were your impulses?
Well, first of all, let me pay tribute to Rex and Nisha and Yvette and all of those who worked to make this possible. And to you for coming out in such numbers for such an important historical occasion. In 1981, I was the chair of the Black Parents Movement in Manchester and a member of the Black Parents Movement here in London, led by John LaRose, the late John LaRose. He passed in 2006. And we were working in alliance with the Race Today Collective and the Black Youth Movement. So I was living in Manchester, organizing, doing community activism in Manchester, but spending quite a lot of time in London. Somebody said at the time that I could drive from London to Manchester with my eyes closed, and that remains the case. So the activities we were involved in Manchester were really an extension of what we were doing in London and in Bradford and in other urban centers around Britain. And of course, those activities would have included struggling with the police and resisting the police oppression, particularly of black young people. So that by the time this tragedy occurred, we'd had loads of experience, both of white racists killing innocent black people, the police and the courts endorsing those actions, at least implicitly, and our communities struggling to get the state to take those attacks seriously. So that was the backcloth, if you like, to the responses that we made to this particular tragedy. So I spoke to John LaRose, to Darcus Howe, to Irma LaRose and others in the Black Parents Movement, got into my car with some other members of the Black Parents Movement and drove to London that evening. And linked up with Alex and John and others who were then about to go and have the meeting with Mrs. Ruddock. Alex had his radio program, Black Londoners, and he would tell you more about that in a minute. So I went backwards and forwards from Manchester, and being the organizer of the Black Parents Movement in Manchester, I was delegated to organize in the North. I therefore organized these large public meetings in Manchester City, Bradford, Sheffield, Huddersfield, Preston, Liverpool, and Leeds. And we mobilized people both to make a reaction to the massacre in their own cities, as well as to prepare themselves to come for the Black People's Day of Action on the 2nd of March, 1981. On that morning, some 15 coaches full of people left the Northwest to come to London, and I think we had a convoy of about 37 cars. And that was the result of the mobilization that I was in charge of in that area.
Professor, you speak of mobilizing, but talk to me of how the apathy of the authorities was made manifest so that there had to be this mobilization. What was what was happening or what was not happening that incensed the community to stand up and articulate themselves in this way?
Well, as the film said, there had been a number of racist murders year on year up to 81, starting even in the late 1960s. In fact, earlier than that, everybody would know the story, the tragic story of the death of Kelso Cochran in Notting Hill in 1958. My own father, who lived in Acton in West London before he went back to Grenada, was nearly killed one morning on his way from work. He worked as a caretaker at an American air base in West Ruislip, and only managed to survive because he had the good sense to go into somebody's front passage, get a bottle of milk, break the bottle, and cut off the ear of one of his assailants. And as he came into the house, what he told us was he saw unfolding before his eyes a Kelso Cochran scenario, because he had been working in Notting Hill when that murder occurred. So there had been those murders. We'd been trying to get the state to take them seriously. But it was only after 1981 that the Home Office started collecting statistics about racial attacks upon black people. More than that, every piece of immigration legislation just about was giving carte blanche to the British National Party, the National Front, Column 88, and all of those people who believed that they were really protecting the internal boundaries of Britain on behalf of white Britain. So they were emboldened by what they did because of the way the state was treating us through its immigration laws, its police practices, its court practices, and just about everything else. So there was a constant resistance within individual cities and towns going on for decades prior to this particular tragedy. It was not surprising, therefore, that the murder, the massacre, acted as a metaphor for all the suffering and resistance, etc., that we had been enduring and waging in the decades before 1981. And I think that is the point that people miss. And they miss the point, including, I dare say, some of the families, because they focus on whether or not there is proof that it was a firebomb, rather than the context in which we had a right to question the way in which the police dealt with that particular tragedy and investigated it. Because I can tell you one thing, and Menelik would know that too, Alex would know it too. But for the work of the New Cross Massacre Action Committee, the police would have framed hundreds of those young people who were there that day, and they would have been in jail for many years. Okay? So we need to understand the context within which that resistance took place and what actually brought 25,000 people on the streets of London on the 2nd of March 1981.
My final question before moving on to Alex is, it's very easy, isn't it, to look back at a film like this. I'm so glad that Rex and Yvette programmed in the film so we can actually see it manifest rather than just remembrance. Word to them. But it's really easy, isn't it, to look at 25,000 young black people walking down the street, and it's really easy to kind of look back and think, those days there was a consciousness that doesn't exist now. Right. But it's very easy to do that. My question to you is in truthfulness, do you think that that's true? Was there a greater consciousness then than you might perceive now? Yes. And if so, was that consciousness because every day on the street we were all faced with those death-like situations. And now our children may be in greater luxury than we ever perceived.
We don't have a lot of time. You are raising some very fundamental issues, and my brother Alex has got a lot to say to us too. Let me just say this. In the 12 months up to the 31st of December 2010, 15 young black people were murdered in London alone at the hands of other black people. The only thing that connects the current tragedies in terms of how we lose our young people, because those 15 deaths are no less valuable than the 13 people who died in that fire and the 14th who died afterwards. The only thing that appears to connect the tragedies of today with the tragedy of 30 years ago is the number of people who actually turn out to these funerals. And that's a sad comment. So what am I saying? I am saying that if the reaction our communities up and down the country had to those racist killings in the 70s and 80s were mobilized into our taking collective responsibility to keep our children alive and to understand what causes so many young people to prey upon others and kill them, then there would be some sense of growth within our communities. I believe we've all become too comfortable. I believe there are too many of us in the service of the state controlling our young people rather than dealing with their political development. The schools don't do that. And if we don't do it within our communities, then it means what we are marking today, 30 years after 1981, would be virtually meaningless to those young people.
I've heard some.
And therefore I have to pay tribute to my good brother here for immortalizing those images. And we have to make sure that the film gets shown to all our young people, whether it be on YouTube, Twitter, my face, whatever it is. Because we are very much in danger of losing our way, not understanding our purpose, and particularly not understanding our historical obligation, given the condition of being young and black in British society today.
If I didn't know how articulate you were, Alex, I would say that you've drawn the short straw. But alas, I know we shall contradict that. Brother Alex, another brother that I am proud, again, to call an elder. I would listen to you on the radio as a young man, amplifying and articulating our needs every week, and I salute you, sir. Alex, we're talking about the role of the media. I mean, you were quite unique in that you were, of course, the first and probably the only at that time person of color who had the airwaves, who had a